Order for September 6th. Ms. Glashevsky, would you do land acknowledgement, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Happy to. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We're grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Konochish.
Thank you, Ms. Glashevsky. Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Ms. Hale.
Here.
Ms. Hughes Scandies.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Oh, very loud.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
And we do not have Walaki with us. Deputy Mayor Gladishevsky
Here.
and Mayor Weldon.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll go to item D, agenda topics. Item number 1, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Resolution 3034, a resolution asking the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities to make immediate and substantial improvements to the intersection of Egan Drive and Yandukan Drive in Juneau, Alaska, aka the Fred Meyer intersection, to prevent further serious traffic accidents.
And Clerk, Mr. Manager. Do you have anything to add to this? We'll just,
Nothing to add, Mayor. Thank you.
and we have no sign up for Zoom, correct? And there's nobody in the room unless Ms. Kester wants to testify, which she does not. So we'll go to the assembly. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move resolution 3034, a resolution asking DOT to make immediate and substantial improvements to the intersection of Egan Drive and Yandukan Drive, also known as the Fred Meyer intersection, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? I object, Ms. Hale said, for purposes of a statement. Where it says in here that the project is going to decrease the Egan Drive speed limit to 45 miles per hour. I think that's not the greatest solution whatsoever. Out of curiosity, I drove 55 on Egan Drive coming into town and was by far the slowest car on the road. And I don't think changing the speed limit is going to change the speed of the vehicles too much. But more importantly, there seems to be an obvious answer here, and that's just to stop the left-hand turn into Fred Meyer. People complained when they couldn't turn from Fred Meyer out back on Egan Drive, and they got used to it. So I think anybody coming inbound on Egan Drive would get used to not being able to turn left at Fred Meyer and going about half a mile more and coming off there. So with my statement, as Ms. Hale likes to say, I will remove my objection and the motion passes. Any participation on non-agenda items? Since we have nobody else coming into the room, we are adjourned.
Call this meeting of the Assembly Finance Committee to order. Can we get a roll call? Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I was just checking my apologies. I was just checking the computer because they've changed the settings on me and it's not responding the way I'm used to. Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Ms. Hale.
Here.
Ms. Hughes Scandies.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
Ms. Gladishevsky
Here.
and Mayor Weldon. And just for the record, Walaki is not present at this time.
That brings us to the approval of minutes. Any changes to the minutes of August 2nd? Seeing none, those are so approved, which brings us to agenda topic D2, our investment update. We have Mr. Whithone online. Mr. Whithone, I've been told by all my assembly members that they would like you to keep this short for us. But thank you for being here.
No, I absolutely understand. Angie had mentioned that to me as well. And of course, we sent you 40 slides just to keep it short. Angie, if you could turn up the presentation and let's drop down to slide number 5. So I'm going to be skipping some of the slides that we sent because I'm just going to hit you with the highlights of what we're looking at. And I have to say, we've got some really pretty good news. If we got dropped out, that's it. Perfect. The economy's doing well. And in fact, it's actually picking up and stronger than we had expected this year. These two graphs show where interest rates were at the end of July in 2022. That's the light green one on the bottom. And where interest rates were at the end of July in 23, and you can see substantially higher. And in fact, the Federal Reserve has raised the overnight funds rate about 5.25% in just a little over the last year. So they're trying to control inflation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But for your portfolio, interest rates rising is good news. And
Madam Chair.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Sorry to interrupt. I just received a message from Withal Gadak, and she said she has not been brought over, but she is in the Zoom waiting room.
all right.
Give us 1 second here and we
okay,
will,
sure.
we're gonna bring our 9th assembly member over.
Okay.
All right, it looks like she has joined us. Go ahead, Mr. Whithone.
Okay, great. So these yield curve graphs, I mean, all we're doing is graphing the yield paid on different maturities. So you've got across the bottom, again, you've got 3-month, 6-month maturities, 1 year, 2 year, all the way out to 10 year. And you can see the yields that they're paying. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that short-term rates are actually paying higher than long-term rates. And that's because the market anticipates, they're trying to, market's always trying to trick you into doing the wrong thing. And what it's trying to do is trick you into staying short right now. Because we're basically at the top of the interest rate cycle. We haven't seen these rates for about 16 years. And so what you really want to be doing is moving a little bit longer in terms of your investments and trying to lock in these rates at the high in the cycle. Like I said, we haven't seen these rates for 16 years. So it's been good for the portfolio. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Let's drop down to the next slide. This slide is just showing you in dark green what we think our predictions are for the economy in 23, and then light green where it's going into 24. I will tell you that a lot of the economists, including our own, are actually upgrading their forecast for 2023. Here we're looking at real GDP. We thought it was going to be at 1.6%, and it's going to end up closer to the year, closer to 2%. So far in the first 2 quarters, the gross domestic product, which is the broadest measure of economic activity, has been running right around the 2% growth rate. And just to put that into context, before the pandemic, the 10-year average on GDP was about 1.9%. So we're running right around the average right now. And we actually think that the economy is going to accelerate in the 3rd and 4th quarter. Right now, there's a tracker in at the Atlanta Fed that's showing the economy running around 4%. Bloomberg has just surveyed all the economists that are on Bloomberg, and they're predicting that it's going to run for the third quarter 3.2%. So the economy's heating up. First half of the year it was running at 2%. We're thinking it's going to run even a little hotter in the second half of the year. Now, that's not all good news. So the economy is doing better, but we've had high inflation, and we're anticipating inflation is running around 4% right now, where the expectation for next year is to get it down to around 2.5%, and then maybe into 2025 to get it to the Fed's target goal, which is around 2%. And that's why the Fed keeps raising interest rates. It's actually the Federal Reserve is trying to slow the economy to keep inflation in check, and it's working somewhat. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Let's drop down to the next slide. One of the big spots in the economy has been employment. We're running around 3.8% in the unemployment rate. Just a couple of months ago, we were running at 3.5. That's a 50-year low. We're up a little bit in unemployment from that, but we've had a ton of new jobs. And you look at all these jobs broken out by categories that we've added just so far this year, year-to-date job gains. In almost every category, we're gaining jobs. The only one was information technology. That was well publicized. That some of the, .com guys that had been hired in the last couple of years, where they expected .com growth and technology growth in that California, sort of San Francisco area, that didn't come about. And so they laid some of those people off. But every other category, really very, very strong growth across the board. That's the good news. And that's really where it's keeping the economy going, because consumer spending is about 70% of the economy. So when people are employed, they spend money. I mean, and that's being reflected in that GDP number. But if we drop down the next slide, and it's not my favorite slide, these are 10 measures of inflation. And I know it's a complicated slide, but let me tell you what it's trying to convey. The dark green line is where inflation was in 2022, and the light green line is where the inflation is in May of 23 of this year. And you can see, and the blue line is the Fed's target. So you can see inflation's been much bigger than the Fed's target. In fact, CPI at one point was running around 8.5%, 9%. Now CPI is down in more of that 3.5% area. In May, it was 4%, but it's actually dropped down below that now. So that's the headline number, but the number that the Fed really looks at is what we call the core number, which is inflation. You take out food and energy, because those are the two most volatile components. Energy prices are always going up and down, and so are food prices. So to get a truer measure of inflation, you take out food and energy, and that number right now for core CPI is running right around 4%. Now, again, that's twice the Fed's target. So the Fed doesn't want it to be at 4%. It is dropping about 0.1 to 0.2% on average per month. So if you extrapolate that out over a year, you're going to drop maybe another 1.5, probably not 2%, but 1.5% over the next year. And that's going to get you down to around 2.5%. Still, again, over the Fed's target, but they think they're going to, if that number continues, they think they're going to reach that in 2025. So inflation's coming down. Now, this is a discussion I have with my wife all the time. Because we hear, oh, inflation's dropping, it doesn't mean prices are dropping. It just means the rate that the prices are going up is slowing. So, when people say, oh, I don't think inflation's easing. Well, it's just not going up as fast as it was. It doesn't mean the prices are going back down. That would be disinflation. But prices went up significantly in 2021 and 2022. They're not going up quite as high in 2023, but they're still going up. So we've got to keep that in mind. Let's drop down to one more slide. I want to talk about, this is based on sort of expectations of where we see interest rates going in the future. And what this is this is every member, voting member on the FOMC, which is the committee, the Federal Open Market Committee, which is who sets the rates at the Federal Reserve for short-term rates. Every meeting, they get asked to vote on where they think the overnight funds rate is going to be at the end of 2023. And then they say at the end of 2024 and at the end of 2025. It's basically asking them what their expectations are on inflation going forward. And as you can see, they then plot everyone's expectations and you get the scattered dot plot here. But the important part is this dark green line, which is basically the average of all those dots. And as you can see, the expectation is for interest rates to be, by the end of 2024, about 100 to 150 basis points lower from where they are today. So if that proves out, and that's basically because they think inflation is going to drop about another 1.5%. So if their expectations are that inflation is going to be lower in the next year by 1.5%, then this has implications for what our strategy should be for the portfolio. We actually, if we're at the top of the interest rate cycle, we should be extending the duration a little bit, making the portfolio a little bit longer in order to lock in these highs and rates. And that's what we've been working towards. Let's drop down to slide number 13, because I think this has some important implications for Juneau. What we have here, this is TSA checked points, a number of people who've gone through the TSA checkpoints, and they graph it on a 7-day average over the last couple of years. You can see in 2020, when the pandemic hit, that's that orange line that's in there. And travel dropped off, big hit to travel. But the next line up in 2021 was that the sort of blue line, and then the green line in 2022. And what you see are these two lines that are very similar at the top. That is back, the gray line is 2019, before the pandemic. And also the dark line is 2023. And what you see is they're running right together. So we're getting those TSA checkpoint traveler numbers back to where they were pre-pandemic. So that means, and why that's really important is that's a really good sign about the economy, because travel is a discretionary spending item. As we all know, you don't travel if your budgets are tight, and that's a good sign that the economy is doing very, very well. And you know, for Juneau, your travel numbers should be up, and they're expected to be up again in 2024. So that is a good sign, and that means a strong economy. Let me just drop down a couple of slides. Let's move on to slide 17. Let's talk about the portfolio. Perfect. Let's talk about the portfolio. So look, the economy's doing well. Inflation's a problem. It's still being in there persistently, but it has been coming down for the last year. So the Fed is doing their job. They're going to create what we think is a soft landing, or which is that we're going to reduce inflation down to towards their 2% target, but yet not throw the economy into a recession. And that seems to be going well so far. How's the portfolio doing? Well, let's look at the year-to-date numbers. Year-to-date numbers, we're beating the benchmark by 40 basis points. And keep in mind, these are only numbers for the first 6 months of the year. So our performance has been pretty good for the first 6 months. Even as a 1-year numbers, we're beating the benchmark by 52 basis points. And as you can see, these numbers are going up, and that's because interest rates have been higher. And you know, during the pandemic, we put some lower yielding securities into the portfolio because that's what was available. Now, all of a sudden, higher yielding securities are in an available. We're swapping out the shorter ones. We're getting the higher yielding ones into the portfolio. So that's been great. I will tell you that if you look at your interest income in the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022, you made about $2 million in interest income. And at the June 30 of 2023, you made about $3 million in interest income. So interest income went up about 50% from 2022 to 2023. We would expect similar increase for your fiscal year all the way through the end of 23 here and into the first 6 months of 2024. So you're going to have another good year, some very good income coming into the portfolio. So that's been our general strategy. I know I'm running out of time, but I will open it up to questions. The performance has been good. The portfolio looks very solid. We're not really worried about a recession this year. In fact, Goldman Sachs just came out and reduced their expectation of recessions in the next 12 months down to a 15% possibility. And it never goes much lower than that. They always have a 5 or 10% possibility that there's a recession out there in the next 12 months. But even the Federal Reserve is not calling for that. And in fact, they just updated their estimate of GDP growth for 2023 and they doubled it. So looks like 2023 is going to be a good year and 2024 is likely to be a solid year as well. And that means interest rates are going to probably stay higher for a little bit longer period of time. And that means good income coming into the portfolio. So things are looking pretty good. With that, I'll open it up to any questions anyone might have.
Thank you so much for the good news. Questions from the committee? Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr.
Sure.
Whitholm. Is that right? Whitholm?
Yep, it is.
I'm looking at page 26 and I'm wondering why we're investing into companies that just have a BBB rating.
Well, we can go down to triple B rated levels. And we don't have, that's not the entire portfolio, but we do have some triple B rated securities within the portfolio. The benchmark, one thing I will point out, if could go on to
hang on just a second. It's packet page 26. Sorry. The slide 19. Apologize for that.
No
And I'm just looking at the chart and there's a rating and it goes down to triple B, I think you called it.
Yeah, triple Bs. Still considered triple Bs, still considered to be investment grade securities. I will point out that the benchmark that we're using has 12% of the benchmark in triple B securities. In the actual portfolio, we only have about 2.7%. So if we're managing against the benchmark, we're underweighted in the triple B securities. The benchmark can go down. We have a bigger, higher concentration in A-rated securities rather than triple Bs, but we do have some in the portfolio. And I will say that in the last 6 months, you're getting twice as many corporations upgraded as opposed to downgraded. So the economy is going so well that some of these triple B rated companies may in fact then get upgraded into that A-rated space. But we're generally underweighted in the triple B space, even though the benchmark has considerably more, almost 10% more in the triple B space than we do.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
Ms. Kladashevsky.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I love your slide 17. Thank you for the performance. What makes the benchmark the benchmark? What is it? Why is Bloomberg 1 to 5 year government credit the benchmark? Who says that?
That is the benchmark we worked out with the staff to manage against. And it is one that we've selected basically jointly together. Now, as I just pointed out, we don't necessarily always follow the benchmark. because we can overweight or underweight certain categories, but that is the one we selected with staff. And it's a very common benchmark
Okay.
for public sector operating portfolios. Sometimes our operating portfolios will select a 1 to 3 benchmark, but since you had a little bit longer term reserve portfolio and seem to have quite a bit of some of the cash on hand, we could go with a little bit longer benchmark. Now,
Okay, great. Thank you for that explanation. That's
Sure thing.
perfect.
sure.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On your slide 15, so packet page 22, there's a question that could this be the beginning of a new CapEx super cycle? Could you explain what that means?
I skipped over that
Or whether or
slide,
not
but
it
it is an important slide. One of the things that we learned in the pandemic was that relying on particularly things that were built in China and in some cases like electric batteries for cars and chips, microchips, which we got a lot from Taiwan and from China. They were trying to, after the pandemic, they said, we shouldn't be trying to import all this stuff. We should be promoting the development of these sort of technologies so we're not so vulnerable to a long supply chain, and we should be what we call now onshoring. And so the CHIPS Act and in part of also the Inflation Reduction Act gave big incentives to companies to start developing plants like microchip development in the US, which we had done a lot of. We've offshored a lot of that stuff in the last couple of decades. And so there's a big super cycle going on right now, which is CapEx, so capital expenditure. They're building all these plants right now. And I will say, one of the reasons why we think the economy is going to continue to go is not only are they building the plants, and you'll see that the steel production, steel demand is up way over around the country because they're building a lot of these plants, but they're also going to have to put equipment in it, and then they're going to have to employ the people that run the equipment. So we expect that to filter through the economy over the next couple of years. And this graph just says, or this graphic just says, oh, here are the places in the country where they're building a lot of these plants. And the different, the blue ones are probably the most interesting ones. Those are the big super semiconductor plants that they're trying to build around the country. And so that, you got to remember, that kind of stimulus goes into the economy, and that's part of why GDP has been running so hot, both the first half of this year, and we think it'll ramp up into the second half of this year and continue on into 2024 because of this CapEx cycle.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, as always, for giving us the 30,000-foot view and information on how our portfolio is doing. We'll see you next quarter.
Yeah, I look forward to it. We'd love to get up there in person and see everyone in person and say hello too.
That would be wonderful.
Hey, that'd be great. Hey, everyone, have a good night and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, that brings us to agenda topic D3, hotel bed tax allocation. Ms. Flick.
If I may go back to the investments for just a moment before we move.
Yes,
To
please.
the hotel bed tax. I just wanted to share with the assembly that CBJ has been participating with the Alaska Municipal League Investment Pool, or AMLIP, for a lot of years, for many, many years. And the series that they've offered for many years has been like a money market account in your personal bank. So it's you put $1 in, you get $1 out. But you earn more on it than you would get like in a regular savings account. In June, AMLIP opened a Series 2 portfolio. And the intention of that is to be more midterm. So putting funds in that you'll need in a year to 3 years. And so it is riskier than a money market fund. It's more like the investments that Mr. Whitholm just talked about. But we were excited to be one of the first of 5 communities to get that pool funded. We anticipate that more communities will certainly participate in that pool. It'll grow. It's done well in the couple of months that it's existed, but it is a new element to our investment portfolio that we're utilizing, and we expect great things from it.
Thanks for that update. Questions? I saw Miss Uscandies and then Miss Hale.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you for that information, Ms. Flick. There were enough slides from our investment report that I was afraid that I might have missed something he said, trying to interpret one of the slides. So I know that we've also, I believe Mr. Rogers had reported we had embarked on a relationship with CashFest, I think it's called. Has that impacted in us putting significantly more or taking some out of any of these investments or the AMLIP or anything like that? Could you give us an update on that?
Absolutely. Through the chair, we decided not to do an extended version of investments tonight with a full recap on that. But yes, we have engaged with CashFest, 3+1 is the company. They are helping us look at all of our usage of cash to make sure that we are earning the best rates that we can. We're paying the lowest fees. Are we the way that we utilize funds? Are we putting things in the right kind of duration? From a starting point, we're doing better than most government entities that they start with. We have some room to improve, and we're continuing to work with them, gather information. Speaking of AMLIP, they were very impressed with the AMLIP product and how we're using it. So I don't know that we're going to have major shifts. I think we have some work to do just in we have some refinements around the edge. I don't think that we are looking for a major shift in how we're doing that, but I intend to bring that back to the AFC for a further discussion. Just tried to save you guys tonight with too much investment.
Thank you.
Miss Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for these updates, Ms. Flick. I think is the AMLIP, are the AMLIP investments essentially our cash versus the investment portfolio that we just were updated on?
Assemblymember Hale, yes, essentially, if you think about our cash flow, this is a great time to talk about it. It's September. Property taxes are due September 30th. We see a huge influx of cash that doesn't need to be sitting in a regular day-to-day checking account. So we will shift most of those funds out to our AMLIP account. And then as we move through the year, we're spending, think if you got a paycheck once a year and then you're spending down from it, you would just pull from those reserves throughout the year as you need it. So that's how we're using the AMLIP account. We're also using it when we sell bonds and we aren't ready to spend all of it right then. So the AMLIP account allows us to separate it out for IRS and tax tracking purposes, but also make it very easy to get a hold of when we are ready to expend those funds on projects.
Super, thank you.
Yes.
All right, seeing no more questions, now we'll move to hotel bed tax allocation. And so I'm going to go right back to you.
Perfect. There is a lot of information in your packet tonight. We put almost a table of contents, if you will, on packet page 49 of all of the items that are included here. So this is bringing back the conversation we had at the last meeting about the allocation of the hotel bed tax. You'll see all of the documentation from previous actions, resolutions, memos, ordinances that create the hotel bed tax, as well as previous memos from Jeff and the one from myself from last time that we talked about. So I know it's a lot of information, but it's there at your fingertip. What I'd like to do to start the conversation is look at the memo that I prepared for tonight, which starts on page, let me put my glasses back on page 50. I wrestled with how to present this information to you because I wanted to give you good, thorough information, but not overwhelm you at the same time. So the first page of this memo is intended to be a summary. I wanted to share with you in the graph our hotel bed tax revenue. As we've talked about before, it is relatively easy to break out the hotels from that revenue. And then we've just made an assumption that if it's not a hotel, it's a short-term rental. So there's nothing magical about those, that split, other than we can readily identify the hotel revenue and pull that out separately. The line that you see in that is just simply the percentage of short-term rental revenue compared to the hotel. So you can see going back from 2014 to the year ending 2023, fiscal year ending 2023, how the revenues have shifted both in quantity, but also in the split between short-term revenue and hotels. The table at the bottom, the takeaway from last meeting was I was to put dollars to the options that we talked about last time, so you could see how that would play out and then have a good discussion, decide where you want to go with these. The Centennial Hall improvements that we talked about last time, the 2% tax is temporary. And so I called it out up top in there's 3 lines of blue writing. So the 2% Centennial Hall improvements portion, I called out separately. And then from the revenue from hotel bed tax, we are paying the short-term rental data collection contract. And because this resides in the special fund, it also does get an allocation of central cost allocation, or interdepartmental charges is how you've seen it presented in the budget. So I wanted to make sure that those were called out in this presentation. In preparing for FY24's budget, the forecasted amount for hotel bed tax was the $3,420,000. So 2% of that was $760,000. If I take out those 2 pieces, short-term rental and the central service allocation, that leaves us with basically $2.6 million. The discussion that we had on our options was a status quo, which is the second column there of numbers labeled option 1. The second one was putting a percentage of the hotel bed tax that was attributable to short-term rentals towards the Affordable Housing Fund. The third option was to just create a new split. And the fourth option was to give priorities to the managers. So what I'm going to do, I wanted you to have that all there. So when we come back to the discussion, you've got one page to look. But if you'll turn to the next page, I'm just going to quickly go through how I came up with those numbers.
Ms. Hale.
Ms. Flick, if I asked a question about this graph overall, would that hold you up right now in your presentation?
Not at all.
I'm just looking at the difference between, let's just say, even 2019 on the blue line and 2023 on the blue line. And it looks like the amount that we brought in on hotel bed tax, excluding short-term rentals, has doubled almost in that period of time from 2019. Am I reading this correctly? I mean, that blue line jumps up, and if that's the case, is that attributable to drastic price increases for hotel rooms, or am I reading this completely wrong?
Ms. Hale, you are reading that correct. That is the price jump, and I will have to look at when the 2% came into effect because I don't have that memorized. Part of it, I believe, is the 2% temporary tax. But part of it is that hotel room rates have grown significantly since 2019.
If I may, Madam Chair, and I just think, I think it's really important just for that realization just kind of occurred to me. And I think that's important as we look at these options, because the amount of the pie has changed a lot. There's more in the pie than there used to be. So I think that might help me at least weigh the options. Thank you.
Yes, and just to confirm, the ordinance for the 2% took effect, the 2% starting January 1st of 2020. And it runs through December 31st of 2034.
Go ahead, Ms. Flick.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So that was just a follow-up. So 2020 is when it went into effect.
That is
Okay.
correct.
Thank you. No, my question was just to make sure I understood, because I appreciated you calling out in the blue those other funds and the interdepartmental charges on that. So that $58,000 as an interdepartmental charge, that is not just being leveraged on the $20,000 a year contract, is it? Or that's for both of those?
So Assemblymember Huskandies, the interdepartmental charge is a charge that goes to non-general funds, basically for the services of general administration of the city. And so because this is a special revenue fund, it gets an allocation of that charge.
For both of those things, the temporary and the contract? Or
So
no?
both of those items come out of this fund,
Right.
but think of them as two separate items. They're not related. The contract that we have for short-term rental tracking comes out of this fund,
Mhm.
but additionally, the cost for providing services, the interdepartmental central service cost is what I've been used to calling it, is also charged to this fund, as it would a wastewater fund or any other special revenue fund.
Okay. I mean, I'm totally with you on why we leverage those funds, or I'm thinking of it as like indirect, which is not
Yes.
accurate, but it's sorry, indirect
along
on
the same lines.
anything that's not our general government. I was thinking of the Centennial Hall improvements as one thing that's causing that fee, and the short-term data contract as one thing that's causing that fee. Is that accurate? Is that $58,000? No, I'm still not getting it. I'm getting a lot of shaking heads from my members.
No, I think Assemblymember Huskandies, you're looking at it similar to an indirect would be a good way to look at it.
Okay,
So this fund, due to its balance and whatever mechanisms are used to determine how much it gets charged, is what makes up the interdepartmental charge.
the
So
whole greater
the
fund.
whole
Thank you.
picture.
That's what I wasn't getting.
Absolutely.
Or you had a few more things to say before we ask more questions. Is that correct?
I was going to run through my process on the floor just so you can follow my logic, and then I'll answer
Go ahead.
questions along the way and at the end. So for the status quo, essentially taking the 9% hotel bed tax, which we based our 24 budget on the 3.4 million. 4% going to Centennial Hall, or sorry, 4% going to tourism, 3% going to Centennial Hall operations. So what I did is I took the $3,420,000, took out the 2% temporary Centennial Hall improvements, took out the $20,000, took out the $58,800, and then I took the remainder, 2.5 million, and basically 4% went to tourism production, less half of that $78,000. And the rest, 3% went to Centennial Hall operations, less half of that $78,000 of other charges. So that would be status quo if you just went with the formula as it exists today. On the option number 2, same start to the conversation, but this is where we look at the split between hotel and short-term rental. And so the split for FY22 was 87% of the revenue was associated with hotels, 13% was associated with short-term rentals. So I took that 13%, the blue, 444,600, and said that's what goes to affordable housing up above. And so then the remainder, got split between tourism and Centennial Hall operations by the same percentage that a 4% and a 3% would have gone. Does that make sense? All right. For option number 3, this was simply to redo the formula so that you had 3% to tourism, 2% to Centennial Hall operations, 2% to the Affordable Housing Fund, and then you still have the 2% Centennial Hall improvements. So along the same lines, starting at the 3.4 million, took out the Centennial Hall improvements, the 78,000, and then the remainder is same as the status quo. I just split the 78,000 by thirds and took it out of their percentage. And then the last page, which is your packet page 52, I needed a way to describe the assembly giving the manager direction. So what I did is left the FY24 totals there. So if we just took 4% for tourism, it's 1.5 million, 3% for Centennial Hall operations, it's 1,140,000. So that's just straight percentages. And the next column over, FY24 budgeted expenditures, this is what was actually passed in our FY24 budget. So rather than $760,000 for Centennial Hall improvements, only $229,200, reflective of the debt service that we had coming up in FY24. We had the short-term rental, we had interdepartmental charges, and then the budgeted amounts for tourism was 1.2 million and Centennial Hall operations, 670,500. So if I take the budgeted totals and I subtract what we actually put in the budget, that's the balance amount, pluses and minuses, and you had $1,241,500 left over. And purely for illustrative purposes, if you wanted to put all of that into the Affordable Housing Fund, you could take that amount and slide it over. That made the priorities to the manager. I just needed a way to illustrate that for you so you could see numbers with it. We've been talking a lot about the Affordable Housing Fund, so truly that could be any split, but for purposes of having numbers for you to talk about tonight, that's how I came up with the numbers for option 4.
Thank you, Ms. Flick. Let's start with questions from the committee. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Flick, there's so many numbers out here floating around. How much money does Travel Juneau think that they have for their 24 budget?
Assemblymember Bryson, I believe that from this funding source, they have 1.2 million. Their request, I believe, was 1.3 million coming into the budget process.
Thank you, Ms. Flick.
Other questions? Ms. Gladaszewski.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of these options. It's really interesting to see and the explanation for what you did for 4. So you basically took all the extra and stuck it in the Affordable Housing Fund. The assembly could obviously do anything else with it, give X thing more, or Y thing more, like it does every year with every other source of revenue. It can move it around. This is the amount that's sort of left over, if you will.
That's correct.
Had to put it somewhere, so you stuck it there.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, thanks. That's fair enough.
Mr. Jones.
Several years ago, yet how many years ago, there was a lot of debate about the hotel bed tax fund balance. And at one point in time, some of that was used during the budget process for special projects that were pretty short term, term limited. Is there a current fund balance in the hotel bed tax?
Assemblymember Jones, yes, there is. I can't quote it for you off the top of my head, but from what I understand, your recollection is correct. That fund balance has been used from time to time to fund special projects, also to stabilize funding if the revenue turned down.
Okay. And so looking at option 4, you're basically saying right now, if you only look at the budgeted and you get the expected revenues, there's at least 1.2 million in the fund balance for the hotel bed tax today, or projected at the end of FY24.
That would be, yes, that's correct,
Plus
Mr. Jones.
whatever's-
Projected,
Plus whatever's there now,
yes,
as long as you hit your target of 3.4 million.
as long as the forecast is
Okay.
correct. Yes, sir.
Tail.
I'm going to phrase this as a question because we're in questions. Ms. Flick, I really appreciate your, like Ms. Glaszewski said, you're laying everything out here and being willing to experiment with the numbers and explain what you've done here. Your recommendation that the AFC provide funding priorities to the manager, could the finance committee be somewhat less specific in terms of providing general priorities to the manager, just like we do for any number of other city services? I guess the reason I'm asking this question is I would hate for us to spend an entire finance committee meeting prior to the budget trying to get way into the weeds on the priorities when we don't do that for everything else. So that's my question, sort of.
Assemblymember Hale, I believe the purpose of option number 4 is to do just as you said, to provide general guidance, likely at the retreat, as to what you would have funded out of that. There is a current resolution in place that if that's the will of this body, we should look to change the resolution, rescind it. Based on how you want to move forward, we would come back with the actions to do that. But I think you're absolutely right. You don't necessarily have to get into all the weeds. You could provide general direction. You know, we'd like to fund Travel Juneau at a similar level or close to it, or this. We'd like to put some into this fund or that fund, and then the manager's budget would come back to you with that included, and you could see it in the context of the entire budget and take action as you guys feel appropriate.
Ms. Glaszewski.
Just because it's what you've done, and one of the reasons we started with this was about short-term rentals and affordable housing. I mean, their direction could be do similar levels before and everything else stick in the affordable housing fund, and then we get to dink with it later, right? That could be direction enough. So I do think we should, are we talking yet? Or are we still doing questions?
You can talk. I didn't see any more questions.
So, yeah. Oh, yeah, you go ahead. There are these resolutions on the books that are super old, and I'm happy to see, one of the options be do like we do with other, with property tax and sales tax. We tell the manager what we want him to do or her to do, and it just gets stuck in that whole big bucket, as opposed to really specific 1% goes here and 2% goes there. I mean, I'm all for funding all of these things in a way that gets them to do the things they need to do. But if Centennial Hall one year needs extra money, we should be able to give Centennial Hall extra money. Or if Travel Juneau needs extra money, we should be able to, we could, but right now it's all very formulaic. And so I'm super interested in something option 4, like with whatever instructions this body is willing to give in a general way that's not all really super nitpicky.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The one thing, I guess we're not into statements yet, but I think providing some of these groups or some of these priorities, services, whatever, certainty, I think is important. I feel that way for Travel Juneau. Like, again, the projection was high, and then it went to 1.3, and then we brought it down. Like, that just seems problematic for that organization. I guess one thing that I'm looking at here is just the Centennial Hall improvements. The voters did approve additional hotel bed tax to go towards Centennial Hall. And obviously it's a complicated building with many ideas about its direction. I guess what I kind of want to make sure is that we're still putting money towards known improvements needed at Centennial Hall. But I guess my question is, does Centennial Hall operations, does that amount include like maintenance and deferred maintenance at Centennial Hall, or is it just to like run it as a convention space?
Through the chair, thank you for that question, Mr. Smith. It includes basic maintenance and operations costs, but deferred maintenance costs are still borne by CBJ separately from that amount. But sort of ongoing day-to-day maintenance is part of that amount, if that makes sense.
I just do one. Thank you for that. I get the other thing, I guess, is just, and do not expect anyone to have this offhand, and I probably should have asked earlier or whatever. I guess it's, do we have a number for improvements at Centennial Hall? Again, keeping in mind, I mean, just stuff that we know that has to get done, whether or not, I'm not even going to say the term, but anyway, like other dreams of Centennial Hall come to being, like just roof stuff and windows and whatever on the current thing. And you don't have to throw it right away. I just am like, are we, should we be, and maybe that's a priority we give during the retreat, but to like, that we're putting aside money following the voters' intent so that we can, take care of that facility and keep improving it.
Ms. Kester.
Thank you. So in 2019, MRV did a cost estimate for a number of improvements to Centennial Hall. You all went through that process. It was improvements to the lobby, to the ballrooms, to the exterior, etc. That cost estimate in 2019 was 12 million. We have asked MRV to escalate that for net present value, and they escalated it to $24 million. So we're preparing a pretty comprehensive look at what still needs to be done to Centennial Hall for you guys as we're looking at no longer pursuing the combined project.
If Mayor Weldon, then Ms. Candies and Mr. Bryson.
Since we're on the debate side of the house, it sounds like, do you want a motion to debate upon, or? All right, I'll give you a motion, and sorry, Ms. Gladaszewski. My motion would be to move option 3 forward to the full assembly. And my reasoning behind that is, while I appreciate everybody talking about priorities to the manager, I think that we might get hung up a little bit too much in the weeds when we try and do that. So I like to see the split. I think the split is fair. It lowers a little bit money to the Travel Gino, but it still gives them an incentive to do better. It hits the Centennial operations, and it does affordable housing fund. I'm also concerned, as Mr. Smith said, that if we do priorities to the manager, we're not going with the intent of the voters, which was to give 2%, which is the 760,000 to Centennial Hall improvements. And Ms. Kester just made my point, because if we keep putting that away, we're going to get closer to that number, that horrible number that she just said, and not putting enough money away. So that would be my motion.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. Ms. Candies, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question, because I was still on the question side of the house. But I just want to, I just want to make sure that I understand, and I think it's from Ms. Flick, because there's so many numbers. I'm looking at option 4, and I want to make sure I understand the Centennial Hall improvements temporary. If we do priorities to the manager, the $229,000. Mr. Smith just asked about this, but that number is coming from where? Because this is coming from priorities, not, and you mentioned debt service a second ago, but this is coming from just general priorities. And Mr. Bryson's trying to help me, but could you answer that?
Certainly. Good question. Assemblymember Hughes Candies. The 229,200 is what was approved in the FY 24 budget. I believe that is primarily the debt service associated with the bond that went out for the Centennial Hall improvements.
Okay. So last year, despite that resolution saying we're going to do this percentage, we did something else.
That is correct.
Okay. Great. Just wanted to clarify that we're already doing that. We're inconsistent and lovable.
Mr. Bryson and the Ms. Skladowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was about to talk about consistency. So while I appreciate the Madam Mayor's motion for option 3, I was leaning towards option 2. And the reason why I was leaning towards option 2 is that Travel Juneau is a business. It's one of our businesses, and it is a marketing business, but it is still a business that we fund. And the most important thing that we can do for that business to allow it to maintain consistency is consistent funding. So keeping them in the same level of funding is going to get us the best results. If we start nickeling and diming them, it is going to have effects greater than the amount that we remove from them. Centennial Hall needs consistency. As Madam Mayor said, as we let this deferred maintenance get behind, we need to consistently put money towards Centennial Hall, or we will get overwhelmed and we'll be telling the public big numbers like $24 million. The Affordable Housing Fund does not require as the same level of consistency. We're putting money in and we're putting chunks of money in. We've also taken a lot of action towards getting hundreds of houses in the hopper. Right now, short-term rentals having a negative impact on the housing inventory. As some of our efforts start to come out in the next few years, short-term rentals might not be as impacting. We have get another couple of years away from the Ironman and be solid that we're not getting them. Then short-term rentals could have a different flavor in this community. Leaving the percentages where they are and let the revenue generated by short-term rentals be put into the Affordable Housing Fund, because it could stand that level of inconsistency. Short-term rentals go away, the city would not be harmed by the Affordable Housing Fund not getting that year's payment. Whereas not keeping consistent payments is, if we take a dip down, Travel Juneau, one of our businesses, would suffer. Centennial Hall, one of our businesses, would suffer. I would strongly recommend that we maintain consistent funding for those two businesses that we are responsible for, and allow the Affordable Housing Fund the extra bonus money from short-term rentals, and let it follow that path. Thank you for the time, Madam Chair.
Skladowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was trying to clarify the question that I think Ms. Hughes Candy's got. So even though we said 2%, we didn't do it last time, which seems weird. But because I agree that that's what the voters voted for, so we should be doing that. And I would should I make a motion to amend the thing? I mean, I don't know what to do. JEDC is another thing we fund, and it comes every year and says, please give us X dollars. The Juneau Police Department, the Fire Department, all these essential services every year come before the assembly in the surrogate of the manager to say, this is how much money we need. And Travel Juneau is no more special than our police department or our fire department or any other department. We should fund them to this extent that they need funding, and they do a service for us. And I think we should fund them adequately. So I just the argument that Travel Juneau is somehow different and more needs more consistency than our police or our fire department just doesn't hold water with me. So did you say I should make a motion? I'm going to
Have a motion on the to another.
Maybe we can vote on them. I would intend to make a motion later for with a 2% for Centennial Hall, because I do think that, that's the most recent vote, and that's kind of, we should do that, right? All the votes are from 40 years ago and are moot. So anyway, I'll wait till we vote on Madam Mayor's motion, I guess.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Gladaszewski said much of what I'm thinking, and I absolutely hear Mr. Bryson, and I've always been a strong supporter of funding Travel Juneau adequately. But what I've seen in pretty much the entire time that I've been on the assembly is, for some reason, they kind of become a political football, and we end up pitting entities against each other. We've got Centennial Hall needing money, and we've got Travel Juneau needing money, and we end up sort of micromanaging that one little part of the budget. And the advantage, as Ms. Gladaszewski said, the advantage that I see in this being in the manager's budget, the manager doesn't yank funding around for the different departments within the city. The manager comes up, or the manager through the finance director comes up with a very stable budget, and they base that budget on what people did in the past and the funding that people had in the past. I think that I support Ms. Gladaszewski's not yet motion.
I'm gonna take my turn here. I do think there's a difference. I'm supportive of the mayor's motion. I think it provides consistency. I'm on the same page with others who are interested in that. I do think our affordable housing fund needs consistency as well. We've been talking about trying to get a regular funding source for this. This wouldn't be sufficient, but it would be a start. And I do think that tying the affordable housing fund to short-term rentals income could be problematic down the road if people are trying to increase short-term rental revenue in order to fund an affordable housing fund. So that's why I'd support the mayor's motion over Mr. Bryson's option. But I will say that there's a difference between Travel Juneau and our departments in that one has an advocacy base that's going to show up when the manager presents the budget. And so I'm not sure that we need to treat those entities the same. Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And I just want to be clear with something everybody is saying. So from my understanding, why we only put $229,000 to the Centennial Hall improvement, we used the rest to retire a Centennial Hall bond. So we were still working on the improvement. So we weren't going against the voters' wishes. It was just done a little differently. So I just want to make that clear to the public that we weren't going to oppose the voters' issues. So, and I'll just say again, Travel Juneau, I believe, is a little bit differently because it's distinctly tied to Centennial Hall. If it does its job and it does its job well, you're going to have more revenue at Centennial Hall because of the convention center that they're trying to do. They're trying to do independent travelers. So they're trying to get Centennial Hall booked. So I just see it as a different thing than others. So I like option 3.
Ms. Hughes-Gandes, and then if anyone else wants to speak to the motion before we take a vote.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I feel like there's now a motion and 2 ghost motions to speak to, so I'll try to keep my comments a little bit more concise. I think I can relate very much, Ms. Hale and Ms. Gladaszewski's comments resonate with me. I know during the finance process, it does seem like we have these ancient resolutions, and then we really zero in on this piece of the budget versus looking at some other stable budgets that come in the form of the manager and the
finance director acting as their surrogates. And it's not to the benefit of folks like Travel Juneau. And I do see, even though they do different things, and the one you could say Centennial is tied as a reward to when Travel Juneau is doing their job well, I see Travel Juneau and JEDC as being very similar as organizations. And the very first time I met with Ms. Perry, right after I got on the assembly, I think frequently Travel Juneau's impression is we have this percentage we should be getting. If you look over the last many years, I don't know offhand how many years they got, what percentage they were expecting, but due to fluctuations and projections, and I think it's more often than not that they don't get whatever ends up being the total actuals. I'm coming around to option 3 because I do want a stable source of funding for the Affordable Housing Fund. I will say at that amount, you could be, if you did the $80,000 grant for the ADUs, which I know is a separate conversation, you could be doing 9 units every year. I'm just throwing that out there to excite you guys. But I think it's, if out of these four options, I think 3 and 4 are looking better, and we should really, if we're considering 3, really spend some time considering whether we want to have this one section of the budget tied to this percentage split. And I'm not sure that makes sense, especially when we use this area of the budget to kind of save us when we were in a pandemic. If this is our weird little piggy bank that we fight over, maybe it belongs with the rest of the money. So clearly I have a very clear idea of how I'll vote.
Ms. Hale, then we'll see where people are at.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll just return, and I think this is related to the last comments that Ms. Uskani was making. I'll just return to page 50 of the packet, and that doubling of that blue line and the dramatic increase in what we actually brought in from hotel bed tax. And some of it's the 2%, but also a lot of it, we keep hearing about how people can't get hotel rooms and the prices are really high. So I guess, and this is why I lean towards not going with fixed percentages at this point in time and lean towards option 4, because, you know, that could grow very large, and then we're at these fixed percentages and we're not giving ourselves the flexibility necessarily that we should, or giving the manager's budget the flexibility that it should have. So that's just the comment on that.
Ms. Gladysevsky.
I meant to respond to another speaker's that the Affordable Housing Fund doesn't needs consistency less than something else. And if the consultants who did the housing action plan say the opposite, we really need to consistently put money in there. And I like option 4 because we could put more money in there. And again, you know, I like option 4, but except with the asterisk about making a fixed percentage to the Centennial Hall because voters just voted on that for the temporary. It gives the assembly the discretion it needs to fill the needs that are before it, instead of a formula that forces us into an appropriation that doesn't make sense for that particular year. So anyway, I just wanted to say the Affordable Housing Fund does require, you know, annual investments, and this is a good way to give it some more. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson.
If Madam Chair, if I could just clarify a little bit, I was not trying to compare the operations of Travel Juneau or Centennial Hall to the fire department or any of the other operations that we have. We're talking about this $3.4 million, and we're trying to figure out how to split the pie up between 3 things. Two of those things are operations that we have people employed with them. And it's like a business, like Travel Juno, people, those are jobs that exist right now that we've already instructed Travel Juno to hire for those jobs. Same thing with Centennial Hall. They have that existing staff. The Affordable Housing Fund is just that, a fund. Does not have an operation. It does not have staff members. So I wasn't trying to imply that we're not, trying to skip over the Affordable Housing Fund. We're trying to split this pie up in a responsible, consistent manner was really the only point that I was making, because we have two operations and one is a fund. I was trying to get us to look at it from that perspective. Thank you for the time.
Are we ready?
Madam Chair,
Yeah. There's a question about, should I be making my motion or should I, how do
Madam-
I- somehow I'm a little confused.
I'm not sure it matters if we amend this motion or we vote on the first motion
Okay.
up and down and then,
Madam Chair,
yes.
is it proper? I believe it is that if I move to amend right now, we have a motion on the floor. That's a strategic call by the members, whether we wait to
Correct.
see how it shakes out, but I'd rather amend if you're
I
not
don't
going
see
to.
why Ms. Kladashevsky can't make amendment to change it.
You would like me to? I would, okay, move to amend the mayor's motion to say that a fixed percentage for the temporary 2% should go to Centennial Hall. And the rest should be part of the annual budget cycle. And we direct the manager at some appropriate time. That's the finance committee figures out. Does that
Understand the motion. Madam Mayor,
I will object. That's just option 4 with different clothing on.
I have a question.
Mr. Smith,
What was the original motion again?
option 3?
Option 3? Oh, I thought it was 3 and 4. Was this 3? Oh. Oh, okay. No, yeah.
all right. Madam Clerk, do you understand? And will you call roll or repeat
Thank
it?
you, Madam
and
Chair.
call roll.
Just to make sure I do have this correct, please correct me if I don't. So for the amendment 1 to Madam Mayor's option 3 motion, the amendment is to say that the fixed percentage for the temporary 2% should go to Centennial Hall, with the rest becoming part of the annual budget direction to the manager. Is that accurate?
Point of clarification, is that Ms. Kladashevsky, you mean that to go to Centennial Hall improvements, correct?
Yeah.
Improvements, not
Improvements.
just Centennial Hall.
Okay.
We have a motion with an amendment and an objection to that amendment. Please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Gladysevsky.
Yes.
For amendment 1. Walaki Dog,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Bryson,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Wall,
No.
and Madam Mayor.
No.
Motion carries 5, no, that's, 6-3, excuse me.
All right, that brings us back to the amended motion. No,
The main motion as amended.
the main motion as amended. Do we have objections
Object.
to speak to your objection?
Well, if you look at the numbers, if you take the 530 out, you're actually giving less to the Affordable Housing Fund with what Ms. Gladysevsky just proposed. So for those of you who wanted to go in the Affordable Housing Fund, you actually did less for yourself. But again, it's just option 4 with different clothing on.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thanks. The reason I'm supporting, I'm sorry, I kind of got confused on that. I thought the mayor was moving option 3 and 4, but so anyway, since it is now kind of option 4 with a set amount for Centennial Hall, the way I just look at it is it's giving more to Travel Juneau than option 3. In terms of what is presented, anyway, it like right sizes a few of these things like Centennial Hall operations, provide Centennial Hall improvements, and then again, we can provide direction to the manager on any of them. So it just seems more nimble and right size. So that's why I'll support the motion. Thanks.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Ms. Flick has presented examples that are sort of potential examples, but they're not written in stone. And if it was this option that we've just voted on the amendment for, that means that the manager, knowing the assembly's priorities, would be able to come back to the assembly with a budget that reflected those priorities. So I think that Ms. Flick has given us something that is not what we're going to expect to see exact number wise in the budget. And I'm seeing a nod there, but rather reflecting the assembly's priorities. For example, affordable housing.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll keep this brief. Yes, I agree with everything Ms. Hale just said. These are example numbers, respects the wishes of the voter to have the 2% going to Centennial Hall consistently, which was expressed as a concern, which makes it distinctly different than option 4. And I think it's incumbent on the assembly to communicate our priorities to the manager, and then we will see the numbers we want to see.
I'll just say one more thing. I think maybe to some people, this option looks attractive because it's got a large number in the Affordable Housing Fund, which is definitely appealing. But for me, I don't know who's going to be on the assembly years down the road. And so I do like setting up structures that will provide regular funding for priorities, no matter who is sitting in these seats. So I'll be objecting. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor Weldon on the main motion as amended.
No.
Walakidot,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Yes.
and Ms. Gladysevsky.
Yes.
Mayor Weldon. We said no already. Excuse me, Ms. Wall.
No.
Okay, motion carries. We have 7-2.
Excellent. Let's take a 5-minute break and then come back for our final agenda topic. If staff are ready. All right, is Mr. Watt, is this you?
It's me.
Is everybody ready? All right, Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Chair. So what I'm going to do tonight is a quick version of a PowerPoint slideshow that we've been doing to the public and to staff about the City Hall project. We've given it a number of times, very positive feedback when we can get people's attention for 20 minutes or so. It's hard to distill the message down. People hear different reasons and different logic, different ways. So we're making ourselves available to do presentations. We've been doing presentations to staff. We have a flyer that we'll pass around that's going out. We have postcards. We have a little short video that we'll show you at the end that we've hired Pat Race to produce, that we hope will get a lot of hits on social media. And I think most importantly is person-to-person communication. So the goal here tonight is to have the assembly understand the information that's out there so that when you individually can talk to people, you can help influence their thinking with real accurate information. So the way we're framing the conversation is, should you vote for City Hall? Oh, is this going to work? Now it'll work. And reminding people, wait, didn't we just vote on this? And we really are at a fork in the road, doing nothing, not an option. And the framing is best use of your money, our money, everybody's money. I think people tend to think of the city as this entity that is not them, but it's all of us together. We talk a lot about the advocacy and the $50,000 appropriation because some groups of people have focused on that. It's important that to point out that of that $50,000, most of it's just going to pay for and account for staff time that already exists. Some of my time, some of the deputy manager's time, some of the incoming manager's time, our grants manager, Ms. Heimbigger in the Engineering and Public Works Department has been doing great work on this. Most of it is just accounting for staff time that already exists. I think it's important to focus on the fact that we agree on so much in the public. Social media and the media is looking for controversy and is kind of chasing arguments, I think, to an extent. And I think we all agree city government should be efficient, effective, easy to use, cost as little as possible. And we're not doing that right now. With our dispersed campus, we are not efficient. With our decades and decades of rent payments, we are not being efficient with the public dollar. We're not easy to use. People get ping-ponged around, and we do not cost as little as possible. Why new? Why now? And this really is some of the discussions we've had with the assembly. I think nobody was wildly enthusiastic about going to vote 2 years in a row. But the important point is we don't want to waste the public's money. So what I've said is I will take my piece of that criticism because we want to make sure that we have an informed vote and people understand what's happening. We've explained the building deficiencies, the leaking roof, the failing plumbing, the asbestos mastic in the carpet. And we've also been spending a fair amount of time turning around a criticism that I think should be a virtue. So there's a criticism out there of how can we trust you with a new building if you didn't take care of the old building? And that actually, in my mind, is a virtue. It's because we never could find a renovation project that made sense on this building that was wise use of the public money. If we were going to renovate this building and move everybody out for 2 years, we would disrupt city services. We would be in various states of chaos. We would spend a ton of money on this building, and we'd be right back where we are today, leasing out 4 other buildings, inefficient disbursement of employees, or worse, we would chunk up a remodel even more horribly into quarters of the building and drive up the cost. The building is just 70 years old. That's just the natural consequence, and we have not invested in the major building systems. There's a lot of question out there. People don't understand that we own this building.
Can you pause for a second, Mr. Bryson?
So, Mr. Watt, this building is 70 years old, or this building has been City Hall 70 years old, or this building is 70 years old and it's been City Hall for since when? Do we know what the year the building was built and the year it became City Hall?
I don't have the exact years, but this piece is about 70 years old. This was our fire apparatus bay. It was added onto in the late 50s with the piece that extends towards Municipal Way and has been used as a city hall since the late 50s. So first a fire station and then the city services that we had starting in the late 50s.
Do we know when the city began renting additional space? At what year did City Hall no longer be able to contain city operations and went to a rental model?
Through the chair, at least 1984. So we started renting the Municipal Way building where the finance and HR departments are in 1984. We had kind of a public question about that. In non-inflation adjusted dollars, we've spent $20 million in rent since 1984 on Marine View, mostly Marine View and Municipal Way.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Manager, Juneau did have a city hall building at some point. Is that correct? Can you talk about what that was like and what was the cause of the demise, et cetera?
Thank you. So I do not know the full history. We had a city hall that was up near the AOB, the Alaska Office Building, where Health and Social Services is. At some point, it burned down. It had a cupola on the top of it. I'm not sure the full history. Probably other facilities where we've been making do. Just explaining the buildings that we're in. So the fact that we own this building is often not understood very well, and that we rent the 4 other buildings. And so here are your employees in rent that we pay every year. Currently, I think $819,000. And we are in a tenuous situation in a number of these. The Marine View, we've talked about, we've had visits from the ocean inspector, regular failures in the plumbing, regular shutdowns in sanitation there. Municipal Way building purchased by Sea Alaska, slated to become part of their expanding campus and their successful programs. The Sea Drone building owned by Goldbelt Corporation, development plans over there. So doing nothing, even in the rental world, it's not an option. And then, of course, the Marine View, we are occupying an obvious 24 apartments, and we've been doing that for well over 30 years. In our current situation, if you go to the 4th column, $819,000 in rent, and then City Hall, we are paying $265,000 to maintain this building. Also not well known that this building costs more to maintain than Augustus Brown swimming pool. It's just old, and that's a consequence of not replacing those building systems. If we just keep on doing what we're doing, rent is going to escalate, and that annual cost will grow even higher. I'd like to talk about it in layperson terms: buy, rent, lease, or buy. If you're going to rent something for a day or a week, like a car, you rent a car. It makes sense to rent in that case. If you need something for a little bit longer, you lease to buy, you enter into some type of approach that makes sense. But if you're in it for the long run, you own. And what we need is just Class B office space, nothing fancy, efficient, functional, accessible. You would not rent that car for 20 years. If you needed a car for 20 years, you wouldn't rent a car for 20 years. You'd buy a car. That seems to be one way that people can hear this message. There's other good analogies on home ownership. What happens on a no vote? this is a graph, and this shows our current trajectory. So these are the $14 million on the left. So we'd have a one-time spike in renovation, and then an escalating series of rent costs leading out into the future. A yes, the green showing the one-time 16 million the Assembly has appropriated in the first years, and then between the years 25 and 48, paying a little bit more money for the debt service. And then once that debt is done, paying dramatically less. So reaping rewards into the future. I like to point out that almost nothing that the city does pays for itself. When we do a public service, we pay year in, year out. Schools, we're going to pay for schools every year. Police, we're going to pay for police every year. Fire, we're going to pay for fire and EMS every year. Street maintenance, and on and on and on. This is the rare case where doing this project actually pays for itself. The prior one is on a year-to-year basis, and this is the cumulative cost comparison. Here on this graph, break even about 2060. And I made the point, it doesn't really even matter if you think that this is aggressive or conservative. Sooner or later, that break-even point, this will pay for itself. If you think we're being too bullish, and I don't think we're being too bullish, we've been very conservative in our numbers. A new city hall will pay for itself. This is a slide that I think has resonated with some people. So two different approaches. So if you rent, you're paying the cost of capital, utilities, replacement, and renovation, operations, and maintenance. So the cost of capital, you're paying somebody else who has invested their capital in a building, and they are building equity and earning profit on their investment. In ownership, you're going to pay the cost of debt and then those same other costs, utilities, renovation, operations, and maintenance. The only difference is after a while, your cost of debt goes down into zero because you pay off your mortgage, if you will, in layperson terms. Whereas in a rental situation, that building owner is going to keep recouping the cost of their capital. You're going to pay it forever. And that is the simple reason why if we're going to be doing this for another 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 years, it absolutely makes sense to own. Reminder on the public polling, we did hire McKinley Group last year. Online poll, we got 1,300 people. That was statistically varied throughout the community, age and demographic, and reasonable geographic distribution. Of the people that filled it out, very supportive and supportive, 70 to 80% investing in a new city hall versus continuing to rent. People click the boxes for long service life and parking and energy efficiency. Essentially, if you go back to that earlier slide, what do we agree on? Easy to use, low long-term costs. We had an extensive selection process where we looked at every piece of property that anybody wanted us to look at. And everything we looked at, not available, not the right square footage, displaced state employees, or in almost every case requires a big renovation. So sure, you can pitch, go use another building, but if it's not built as offices, then you're right back to that renovation problem. And we landed on 450 Whittier as the selected site.
Ms. Hale had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the question is about the survey of the public. So that survey was conducted before the election, and then in the election, the city hall failed. And do you have any thoughts about how to reconcile those two things and how much we can rely on that survey now as we're going into another election?
Thank you. I think we have to be honest that we erred last year in not advocating for the project. And there was a lot of misinformation, particularly on social media. I think when we have a chance to tell the story, people look at it and they say, oh, okay, that makes sense. I went to the Chamber of Commerce several weeks ago And I got a pretty warm reception at the Chamber of Commerce, and a bunch of business people after the meeting basically said, I got it, makes sense to me. I think by not advocating last year, we were subject to the whims of other things that were happening in the election and misinformation on social media. With long public process, lots of opportunity for people to be involved. If this passes, again, the details are going to be things that people can participate on. 450 Whittier Street, we own the property. The zoning is proper. It meets our space needs. We want to point out that 46,000 square feet is less than we're currently using. The buildings that we're in weren't often made, or not typically made, for offices, so they're carved up in all sorts of inefficient ways. From an accessibility standpoint, much easier for the public to use, and there'll be public parking and ease of access for all of our citizens. Just a little bit about the scope. We're trying to put 160 employees all in one place. We'd have assembly chambers and public meeting rooms and restrooms and dedicated parking, energy efficient and designed for a long service life. People ask about parking a lot. I think there would be a reshuffling of the parking situation. Currently, city employees park predominantly in the Marine View parking garage. We probably would swap over some spaces into the DTC, and we would also work on our state leased surface parking with the state reducing the number of employees. It's pretty clear to me that they don't need all of the surface parking that they have. As a long-term project, we also have the North State Office Building parking garage. I think there's a lot in play to the benefit of our summer tourism sector. More parking spaces in Marine Park Garage would be snapped up in a heartbeat by people working the tourism season. Project cost, 43 million is a large number, but again, we're not trying to paint a rosy blue sky picture. I think it's a legitimate, safe cost estimate. I had somebody in the banking world ask me about contingencies, and we dove into it and showed the percentage contingencies that we had, and that person was satisfied. They thought that was prudent. Design build, I think the best way forward on this project is a method that the private sector would use to control cost overruns. Typical city procurement is low bid procurement, and low bid procurement usually means that you end up arguing about the details later, which usually means that you end up conceding on cost to get the quality you want. In a design build method, you front load a lot of that thinking, and you specify performance of building materials, and then you hand over the execution to a general contractor and their architectural team. And for a city hall, I think that makes sense. I think we can specify what we need and go with that procurement method. Debt service and the mill rate. Not everybody in the public is well versed with this graph. You've seen it many, many times. This is a tremendous opportunity to take on a project like this with declining debt. We have the opportunity to feather in the debt service for a city hall project and maintain debt capacity for lots of other municipal needs. So we can do this project without raising taxes. Speaking of property taxes, the public often doesn't understand where our property taxes go. Few people understand that 46 cents on the dollar go to education, 42 cents to city services, and 12 cents to debt. So just note, this is property tax only. We've had feedback from the public about thinking that the city has grown its budget and has increased tax burden on the citizens. So this graph shows inflation adjusted general government spending per capita. And the basic take-home message here is since about 2010, the city budget is pretty much the same per capita, adjusted for inflation. So we have different services than we had in 2010, but we also have growth in the economy from tourism, but the burden for citizens really hasn't changed. It's gone up for inflation, but it hasn't increased. Details on the ballot measure here. Vote yes on 27 million in general obligation bonds. Pay less, get more. Right now, we're paying more and getting less by paying rent year in, year out, by having a dispersed workforce that makes it hard to collaborate and share services. We are unnecessarily expensive. This would be easy for the public, free up space for housing, and would allow for efficient management of the workforce. We got a website with a ton of documents. If people are interested, QR code is there. And now we're going to show a little short. So if you know people that have 2 minutes of time that they're willing to devote to this topic, we, I think, have a compelling video that Pat Race has put together for us.
Is that on the website, that video?
It will be soon. I think he just finished the edits today or yesterday, and I don't think we just haven't pushed it out yet.
Hey Juneau, this is Pat Race, and this year our city has a chance to build a new city hall, so I hope you'll join me in voting yes on October 3rd. Our current city hall is a weird-shaped 1950s fire station, complete with scary old bathrooms and loads of asbestos. The last major renovations were in the 1970s. To bring the old building up to code would cost over $14 million, and we'd have to pay to relocate staff during that time. On top of that, the current building is too small, so we're paying $820,000 a year to rent a bunch of other places downtown. And I don't know if you've noticed, but rent isn't getting cheaper. So stack up all that cash we're using to band-aid the old building and rent office space, and it quickly becomes more cost-effective to build something new. The city examined 26 sites and did a year's worth of public meetings before picking the new location at 450 Whittier over by Zach Gordon. I like that it's still walkable from the downtown core while also accessible to folks driving in from the valley, without having to parallel park in the middle of 2,000 tourists taking a picture of a raven eating a meat stick. So that's the plan. Let's build something. And not like a gold-plated mega project, but something practical, functional, and purpose-built for city government in a single location with all of our core city staff under one roof that isn't leaking. We'd be freeing up what used to be 24 apartments in the Marine View building at a time when downtown desperately needs more housing, and we could also sell or rent the old fire station. The Seadrome building is being redeveloped, and the Muni Way building is becoming part of the expanded Sealaska Heritage Campus. So we've got to move anyways. And this will look nice, it will be more efficient to operate, and it'll be our building, something we all own together and can take pride in as a community. And I know there's naysayers with any project, but I'm really impressed with all the good work the CBJ's been doing over the last couple of decades. I love the ice rink, I love the Valley Library, I love the new swimming pool. The city puts together good projects and runs them well, and I'm confident this new city hall will be a great improvement over what we have now. But don't take my word for it. There's a ton more information about this project online. Go to juneau.org/engineering-public-works/new-city-hall. Yeah, I know it's a long address. I'll leave it on the screen as I say.
Paid for by the City and Borough of Juneau, 155 South Sword Street, Juneau, Alaska, 99801. Rory Watt, City Manager.
But hopefully soon at 450 Whittier. Goodness cheese, Juneau.
I hope you enjoyed that. We've enjoyed that greatly. So there have been a lot of questions. You know, where's the city on this? And we've been saying it's coming. Ballots are going to be mailed out on the 14th, so we weren't trying to launch things too quickly. I've got flyers here tonight that we can pass out, but we're looking for lots of voices on the project and trying to arm you with that. Definitely spirited numbers of op-ed pieces in the newspaper, and definitely banter on social media, but that's what we have for you.
Thank you for that. Questions or comments from the committee? Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a nice thing to say. I know a lot of people are mad at the city right now, especially over property tax. But when I followed Mr. Watt at the chamber, and I just said, you have to remember who you're trying to build this building for. It's not for Mr. Watt. He's going to be wearing long hair and shorts and traveling around the van. It's certainly not for me. I'll have termed out before the new city hall's built, and many of you in this room will have termed out before the new city hall would be built. But it's for the staff that has to work in some pretty untenable conditions, especially in Greenway building, and it's also for your community. So you want to take pride in your community. You want to help your public servants do their job better. So I just would encourage everybody to support City Hall.
Anything else? Seeing none, no other comments or questions. That brings us to our next meeting date, which is September 27th. And with that, we are adjourned.